King James's Town. While Spain hauled boatloads of gold out of South America and brought it to King Philip II, James looked on in envy. He wanted his share of the gold too. So he gave a group of wealthy Englishmen royal permission to look for gold in North America. These wealthy men joined together to buy 3 ships, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. They filled the ships with food and tools and offered free land in the New World to men who would sail the ships to North America and search for gold. The new settlement, or colony, would belong to King James, and each wealthy man would get a share of the gold. Instead of milk and honey, one wrote to a friend, we will find pearls and riches. The 3 ships set out from England one cold December day, filled with bricklayers, blacksmiths, sailmakers, and goldsmiths. But as soon as the ships turned west, a strong wind blew them back. The ships struggled for 6 weeks against the wind before they got out of sight of shore. The hopeful colonists, crammed into tiny cabins beneath the decks, began to get seasick and argue with each other. At last the wind changed, and the ships began the long journey across the ocean. For 5 miserable months, the colonists lived on biscuits baked as hard as iron and meat pickled in salt. Their fresh water, stored in barrels on board, was green with algae. They had barely enough to drink, and no one took a bath for the entire voyage. Finally, the North American coast came into view. On May 13th, 1607, the 3 ships landed. The colonists staggered to shore and found shady green woods, streams of water, and tall, thick grass. The spring water was warm and sunny. The forests were filled with wild geese, deer, and rabbits. The river nearby teemed with fish, crab, and oysters. The Indians, Native Americans, who lived nearby seemed friendly. The colonists, sure that they had found the perfect place for their new home, built a few huts and named their colony Jamestown in honor of King James. The settlers didn't spend very much time building, though. They spent their days searching for gold. One of Jamestown's leaders, John Smith, soon grew exasperated. There is no talk, no hope, no work, but dig gold, wash gold, refine gold, load gold, John Smith complained. He knew that the colony's grain supplies brought from England would soon run out. He was afraid that the Indians might grow hostile. He wanted the colonists to grow their own crops and to build walls to protect themselves. Meanwhile, the Indians near Jamestown were watching the English explore further and further into their country. They were worried. How much land did these newcomers want? One day, Indian warriors attacked a little group of colonists who were out searching for gold. The colonists, frightened by the attack, finally listened to John Smith's advice. They built a fort with thick log walls to protect them, and they began to clear fields for crops. But it was too late. The English had arrived in Jamestown during a terrible drought. There was no rain. The fields were dry and the crops didn't grow. Water grew scarce and dirty. The grain from England was almost gone. The colonists began to grow ill from disease and starvation. One colonist, George Percy, wrote, "There were never Englishmen in such misery as we." 5 men had to divide a small can of barley soaked in water. Our water was filled with slime and filth. Sometimes 3 or 4 men died in a single night. By fall, half the colonists were dead, and then winter came. The men who were still alive huddled in their icy wooden huts. Their feet froze. Their joints were swollen from cold and hunger. But John Smith was determined to make Jamestown a success. Just before Christmas, he rounded up a few healthy men to go looking for food, and perhaps for a better place to settle. Smith and his companions paddled their way slowly up the river that ran deep into the woods. The water grew shallower and narrower. Overgrown banks rose up on either side. Briars reached down into the canoe. Finally, they came to a fallen tree, collapsed across the water, and could go no further. John Smith pushed the canoe to shore and got out. "Go up on the bank and cook our food," he told his companions. "I'll see if I can figure out where we are." He walked away along the muddy edge of the water. The river turned and twisted. Soon he lost sight of his men. He paused, looking around. Suddenly, he heard a faint rustle ahead of him. An arrow struck him in the thigh and bounced off his heavy leather breeches. John Smith drew his gun, shouting a warning. He could see 2 Indians, half hidden by the undergrowth, notching arrows to their strings. He backed away from them and stumbled into the shallow river. More Indians appeared from the brush around him. Smith, floundering in the river mud, shot all the bullets out of his gun. By the time he ran out of ammunition, he was stuck to his waist in mud. Smith laid down his empty weapon and held up his hands in surrender. The Indians pulled him out of the mud and marched him through the thick woods. Finally, they arrived at the edge of a large clearing filled with Indian houses. Children played nearby. Women were cooking and carrying water. A large hut stood at the village's center. It was the palace of Powhatan, the great Indian chief. Inside, Powhatan was lying on thick mats, wearing strings of pearls and a rich garment of raccoon skins, surrounded by his chief warriors. He stared at the muddy, disheveled Englishman for a long time. Of course, the 2 men did not speak the same language, but John Smith had learned a few words of the Indian language, and some of the Indians knew a little bit of English. With the help of these translators, Powhatan and John Smith managed to talk to each other. Put into English, their conversation might have sounded something like this. "Why have your people come to our land?" Powhatan asked. "We had to fight with the Spanish," John Smith lied, "and they drove our ship onto your coast. Now the ship has sprung a leak. We have to stay here." "Why have you and your companions wandered so far into my territory?" Powhatan demanded. John Smith had to think fast. "Great chief," he said, "we intended only to attack your enemies, who live up the river and who fight against you." "If that is true," Powhatan said, "we can live in peace together." So John Smith promised that the colonists would not attack Powhatan's people, and Powhatan let him return to Jamestown unharmed. Eventually, another Jamestown leader, John Rolfe, married Powhatan's daughter, Pocahontas. Now there was truly peace between Jamestown and Powhatan's tribe. The Jamestown colony grew stronger and stronger. The English were in North America to stay.